she was kind of Romanized. She was given a Roman education. She knew how to administer the way things had. At that time, the Senate was still around. So she was given this type of education, which we like to talk about as not happening with a lot of women, but she was very educated and was incredibly intelligent.
Thank you for watching Where the Past Lives. I'm your host, Brandon Foster. Where the Past Lives is dedicated to bringing history to life however possible. If you love history, especially medieval history, then this is a place for you. Support my work by liking and subscribing. You can also financially support my work through the link below. Thank you and enjoy the show.
Let me tell you the tale of Queen Amalasuntha. She was a Germanic queen, primarily of the Ostrogothic Kingdom, which was in Italy, though at that time they just called it the Gothic Kingdom, and it was split between Italy and Spain. At different times, different people would be in charge of either one and not the other, or both. During her short reign, she took over for her father, Theodahad, who had taken the kingdom from Odoacer, who was the famous king who removed the last Roman emperor, though at times Theodahad was sometimes deemed an emperor in all but name. He would last for many decades, but when he passed away, his daughter would take control. Now, this was very unusual, and it is something that historians find very fascinating. So, what was the life and reign of Queen Amalasuntha like? Well, let's find out. So, some backstory. She was again born to King Theodahad, and her mother was Athalaric. Now, her mother is important to her story because she was from the Frankish kingdom, which is now France and Germany, while she was married to a Gothic Italian ruler. So there was some international stuff going on there. So she was one of the daughters or the only daughter. We're not exactly sure. I've read different accounts saying different things. But she was the primary daughter that the documents talk about. So she was born sometime in the late 5th century, shortly around when Theodahad became king. She would become ruler in the 520s, though she was married to another person within her dynasty, kind of to keep the rule within the family, though I don't think too close to make our modern times a little funky. She was highly educated during that time. Since Theodahad was ruling in Rome, he was trying to combine a lot of what was going on with the local populations, so what the Romans had already established, plus the Germanic way of doing things, the Gothic way of doing things. She was kind of Romanized. She was given a Roman education. She knew how to administer the way things had. At that time, the Senate was still around, so she was given this type of education, which we like to talk about as not happening with a lot of women, but she was very educated and was incredibly intelligent. She was again married off to a gentleman, and he died in 522. He was supposed to be the one to take Theodahad's throne, but that would never happen because he died prematurely. So this then led to her son, who he would become the ruler, but he was too young, so she would take the throne as kind of the person in charge until he came of age. But unfortunately, he would also die too young, and she would then take the throne fully as queen regent. Now, historians believe that her son passed away young because of drinking. He kind of lived that party life too much, being a young prince kind of idea, and he just died young because of that. She tried to give him a Romanized education like herself, and this would put a lot of conflict between her and the other Gothic lords in the area. Goths at that time were very warlike. They wanted men to be raised in a very specific way. They wanted them to be warriors. They wanted them to be strong military leaders. They didn't care so much about an education. They kind of thought that was going to kind of feminize a leader. So they didn't think it was something that was really needed. But she disagreed. She wanted him to be raised in a Romanized way like she did. She wanted him to be able to rule in a, at that time, kind of modern, civilized manner. She also wanted a connection between Italy and Constantinople to grow. This was something her father wanted, and he tried to grow all the different, political factions in Italy. And she wanted to connect the two, the old Rome and the new Rome, as you could say, together. So, in 522, her husband, Athalaric, that was his name, he passed away. So then, again, she ruled along with her son for multiple years. She would rule from about 526-ish, 525 to 536, somewhere in that reign. So not a very long rule. Again, part of that was with her son, and then when he passed away, she would take the full reign. So during that time, Justinian I was Emperor of Constantinople, and he would be the main person that she would discuss things with. She would send letters to him and him back to her. She was trying to negotiate this relationship to grow between Italy and Constantinople. One thing that she did during her short reign, especially when her son was still alive, was she assassinated 3 rivals. Gothic culture did not have a concept for a woman ruling, even if it was a woman ruling for her son, who would then take control. This was a very Latinized concept. The Romans had lots of ideas of women having power, and even the Franks would have concepts in their culture of doing this, but the Goths didn't. The Goths did not think that a woman should have sole authority. They were perfectly fine with a woman being an advisor. They were perfectly fine with a woman being a diplomat. They thought those were roles women suited well for. But they did not believe that a woman should rule outright. So even though at first she was the queen in place of her son, they still didn't like it. And they didn't like that she was Romanizing her son. They thought, again, that was very bad. And they definitely didn't like it in 534 when her son passed away, because then she took the throne completely for about a year. But she felt insecure. So she did 2 things. And these 2 things would really change the course of her rule. The first thing she did was she sent an envoy over to Justinian, and she said, if things go south for me, will you be willing to, protect me? Can I go to Constantinople and live in the court and you protect me? And he responded, and he's like, sure thing, I got you, girl. You can come here and I will protect you. The second thing she did was she had her cousin, Theodahad, to become co-regent with her. She thought that he was someone that she could trust, and she thought it was someone that she could share the court with, and this would appease some of the more conservative Gothic lords. And that leads us to the most fascinating part of her life, and unfortunately the most tragic part. This is where historians kind of discuss the most, as far as I've been able to tell. And this is her death. So unfortunately, we don't really know why she was assassinated, or if she was assassinated at all. That is the most general idea, was that she was assassinated, not just killed. So there's 3 different reasons why historians, or the plays behind her being killed. So the first one is that her cousin, who was not really a great dude, she was in all other areas very astute politically. She was an incredible person at discernment and understanding the political moments. but not so much with Theodahad. Something clouded her judgment. I'm not sure if it was a family tie. They might have grown up together and she just remembers a different aspect of him. But he craved the throne. He wanted what she had, and he was willing to do a lot of things to get it. So even though he was co-regent, he did not like sharing the throne with his cousin. So the first theory is that he just had her offed, and that was it. He became king, he moved on, she's dead, the end. The second theory, which is probably the most juicy, was that Justinian I's wife, Theodora, she did not like that there was this other powerful, probably younger woman appearing in the Constantinopolitan court. She was a very powerful woman, and she was not going to share any influence she had with her husband. And whether there was any intentions, I have not read that there was any legitimate intentions on either Justinian's or Amalasuntha's part of a relationship outside of protection. There very well could have been, it just wasn't documented, or I haven't read it. But either way, Theodora felt very threatened. So Justinian had lots of spies in Italy. So the theory goes that one of those spies was actually in league with Theodora, and she paid him, once she felt things were getting too close, she paid him to off the queen. So that's the second theory. The third theory is probably the least likely. It comes from Gregory of Tours, and he wasn't really known for being a very good kind of historian when it came to things outside of his realm. If it came to tours and things that happened directly in his area, he was pretty good at documenting that, but he wasn't great at researching what actually happened. So his story about Amalasuntha, he actually doesn't even mention her name. He mentions a couple small events, and they're really weird, which is part of the reason why I like them. It's kind of just this weird, funky story. And it actually took a while for me even to figure out if these stories were connected, and I'm pretty sure they are. Most historians think this is who Gregory of Tours was talking about, but most historians don't think this actually happened. So the story, the third reason that she was assassinated, was that she had Tragula, however you say it, I'm not quite sure. And he was actually a slave. Not sure how she would have come in contact with him, what type of slave we're talking about here. But the queen fell in love with him, and they ran away together, and her mother, Adelfleda, she writes to her daughter saying, please come home, please do not do this wicked thing. And the wicked thing wasn't even that they were together, it was that he was below her station. So her mother was angry that Amalasuntha was marrying someone so far below her position. That was what her mother was annoyed at. So Adelfleda sends this message. Amalasuntha says, no, I'm going to be with this boy. You can't stop me. And this might have been a story from earlier in her life before she became queen. Gregory doesn't say, and we're not sure. So her mother sends some soldiers, and I'm not sure if these are paid mercenaries, if they were actually Gothic soldiers. Again, Gregory doesn't tell us much. And they kill Tragula, and Gregory even says they beat the queen up. They beat up Amalasuntha, and then take her back to her mother. And for me, that's not what's going to happen if she was queen. If she was actually the ruler at that time, if this was after her son or her husband died, and if this was after her son died and she's full ruler, this isn't going to happen. So again, there's a lot of holes in this story. It's just kind of funny. But the story ends with Amalasuntha poisoning her mother during communion. She poisons the communion cup, and when her mother drinks the wine, it poisons her and she dies. So then, when Theodahad becomes co-regent with her, or however, again, Gregory doesn't say the story well, so he makes it sound like Theodahad just becomes king. So when he becomes king, he finds out the truth of what happened, and he has a bath heated up to really hot temperature, I guess boiling, I'm not quite sure, and the fumes somehow kill Amalasuntha. I don't know, it's a really weird story, but she dies. So that's the third story. So either she was killed, two of the stories have Theodahad killing her. One was because of political ambition, which sounds very plausible. The other that is him killing her because of family honor, kind of, which is weird. And then the third was from Theodora and her problems, which that does sound very plausible. But we don't have a lot of evidence of that. It's just kind of, it's there, and it's a high possibility. So her death actually causes some European international problems. So because of her death, Justinian I actually invades Italy. And this is what starts the last, what are called the Gothic Wars. So Justinian invades, he tries to incorporate Italy back into the Roman Empire with Constantinople, and he is eventually not successful. And going back to what I said earlier, which was very important, is that Amalasuntha was the niece of the Frankish kings. Remember, her mother was a Frankish nobility. So her uncles, I believe it was her uncles, are the kings Childebert, Lothar, and Theodebert. These are, and then Theodahad is also, I can't remember all the different relationships at different points in Merovingian dynasty. Fathers and sons and cousins are all ruling at the same time. It gets confusing. So they're all her relatives, and they're all the powerful Franks up north. At this time, the Franks were one of the most powerful Germanic kingdoms. The next were the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths, which literally just means Eastern and Western Goths. And they had, again, Spain and Italy. But most of Central Europe was either owned by the Franks or very small kingdoms that were still left after the Germanic migration. And they would eventually be incorporated into the Franks over the centuries. So these four kings find out what happened to their niece. And again, this is Gregory of Tours' story. And they send a letter to King Theodahad, and they say, hey, you need to have compensation for killing our niece. Now that might sound weird, but in Frankish culture, there's something called a Wehrgild, and it's basically the payment for a wrongful death. So instead of having someone have a revenge killing or an execution, which could cause more death because people are going to then go for revenge killings, they have this thing called a Wehrgild or Wehrgild. And so basically it was some type of compensation monetarily saying you did something wrong and you're going to pay via financially to compensate us for what you've done. It was their way of trying to stop all the killings and stuff like that. And I think it was kind of successful. But anyways, so Theodahad gets very scared because, again, the Franks are very powerful. So he sends 50,000 pieces of gold as kind of the appeasement. But that doesn't stop Theodebert from invading Italy. And again, Justinian invades Italy. And so it becomes this huge kerfuffle of war going on in Italy. And it would actually end a small type of peace that was going on in the peninsula. So at that time, most of Italy was ruled under the Gothic Kingdom. And because of these events, it would break up into lots of different kingdoms. And it would be that way for like over 1,000 years almost. And you have the Papal States and the Italian kingdoms, and different city-states would own different pieces of it, and sometimes you would have the Franks owning it under like Charlemagne, and it was just a huge mess. And it wouldn't be until I think Italian unification, which would happen centuries and centuries later. So this ends the story of Amalasuntha and her very historically important but short life. She did not live very long, a decent life for somebody, but her reign was very short. Most of that was her in school, her short marriage, her co-regent with her son, a very, very short solo reign, which was monumental for the Gothics and one of the first documentation of a queen ruler, especially of the Germanic peoples, and then her very tragic death. So if you like these type of stories about Germanic peoples and medieval history, then send a like, comment, all the fun stuff, and thanks for watching.